Hello, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on episode 2 of what I call Creating Suede Motion. I want to introduce you all to Luke Eggerton. Luke, how are you doing today?
Not too bad, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, super excited to have you on and as our second guest, and what is a long initiative of mine to demystify outreach, to demystify the industry of outbound lead generation. There's so many AI tools and strategies and hearsay that the world has become muddy with tactics. We've talked about this a lot, and you strike me as someone who's systematic. So I'm excited to get to know you better, excited about this partnership, and just excited about the conversation ahead. So I got some fun questions for us to really just like dig into as we're mid 2026. There's new AI tools coming out left and right. You are a longtime cold caller, and you're starting to put together different strategies of your own. I'd like to start with a question that always comes up with people who are getting into outbounds. They want to sit back and let an AI do LinkedIn messaging for them and all that. I want to talk about cold calling, man. Is cold calling dead? 2026, mid 2026. Luke Eggerton.
Is cold calling dead? So I suppose that's the question, isn't it? That's, I spend every day scrolling LinkedIn before I'm making calls. I can't help it. I'll go through all the comments. I'll type in cold calls. And yeah, inevitably, there's always that comment which says cold calling's dead. There's a better way. I think short answer, it'll never die. There's no way cold calling will ever die. I think it will evolve as time goes on, as it has currently. And I think the challenge with cold calling is it goes through cycles. So, we often optimize the wrong channels, and we often optimize the wrong things. And I think cold calling is guilty for that as well. I don't know whether people listening to this would agree or if you'd agree, but I think sometimes we are guilty of saying, okay, let's just make more dials. We've got an issue here. We've got this gap in this pipeline. Let's just hit the phone and make more dials. That will solve everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that used to work. I've come from the era where it did work. That was the playbook. Back until 2020, the playbook was hire more people and make more calls.
Right.
And that was the best way to scale. But obviously since COVID, that's not been the way to do it. And there's different initiatives in place now. So is cold calling dead? No, I don't think it is. I think there's two camps. There's doing it right and there's not doing it efficiently. And I think most people look at the second camp and go, they're not doing it right, therefore it's dead.
Exactly.
So that's
it seems like it should be dead. 2026 is so digital. Do people pick up the phone anymore? If you're not in the outbound space, you're like, cold calling, nobody picks up the phone. But I was just working with a client who was surprised at how many people picked up the phone and how many great conversations he had, just cold people over the phone. And I'm like, it's not dead. And the more people who think it's dead and are not calling, honestly, the better it is for the people who are calling in some stances.
Well, here's what I asked people who say cold calling dead. I say, okay, well, what channel is working? And they'll often say email or LinkedIn or, all of these different channels. And, just for clarification, I'm not criticizing those channels because they all do offer value. But I get emails every single day. I'm not an important person. I don't run a big company. And I get emails every single day. Most of it's AI automated. It has no real relevance. It's personalization at scale at best. They'll say, oh, I see you're doing some really good work of blueprint sales at the moment. They don't know what I do. And they'll start to talk. It'll be a 3 or 4 paragraph email about how they can help. All about them, nothing about me. And I get lots of those emails. Same with LinkedIn. I get lots and lots of messages on LinkedIn. I never get a phone call. Now, again, I appreciate that might be because I'm not a target for most people. But when I speak to these prospects on the phone, sometimes I ask them, I say, look, do you get many phone calls? And the vast majority don't. They don't get phone calls. And the phone calls they do get are very low value anyway. So most of the time people write it off. But actually, if you have a real high targeted phone call, which focuses on the prospect and targets 1 or 2 particular problems which are relevant to them, that's worth its weight in gold. And this is what I say to people is other channels are noisy because they could be automated. I often say that cold calling is probably one of the last channels which has been automated at scale with AI. Obviously, I know there's ways to make more calls and things like that, but ultimately, as we currently sit, middle of 26, there is not a way for AI to call on your behalf, not legally anyway, as far as I'm aware. So a person still has to pick up the phone and have the conversation. Every other platform, you can have AI do it for you. And I think we're seeing the results of this already. You know, we're seeing AI send mass emails. We're seeing these LinkedIn outreach posts, and they're not bringing any substance at all, and they're easily ignored. So actually, as long as this channel is protected and isn't automated to that level, I think we'll continue to have success for many years. The only time I think it will die is when AI is able to actually carry out the call itself. At that point, I think we will have to really sit there and question it and say, you know, what's the point in this? And I think the people who are doing well will be the ones who prevail.
Yeah, you're hitting on a lot of the points I wanted to talk about, so I'm excited to dive in. I did want to, take a step back, and what do you think about the constant noise of the new go-to-market AI tools hitting the market? How are you handling that?
So I think it depends. The challenge is most AI tools out there are that they're trying to solve an issue, which again is the whole point. Sometimes they're created with an issue which isn't really relevant, or it might be relevant to the person who's built it, but actually it's solved. And I think we see this across lots of different industries and lots of different products being created. The one caution I always say to people is, before you start bringing more tools in, you need to really make sure that the process you have is absolutely nailed down, and that you're able to follow that process from start to finish and it makes complete sense. I see too often companies bring in new tools which are supposed to help them do things better and quicker, and they actually end up adding stages to their process at each point in order to fit that in, and that just stretches the sales process so much longer and makes it more harder for accountability and to track what's going on, and ultimately that affects revenue further down the line. So I think, tools are great. I love tools. I'm all about learning. I'm open-minded. If someone says to me, I've got something which can genuinely make your life better and actually deliver better results, I'm always open to hearing about it. And sometimes I'll take a meeting with someone and go, wow, that's actually really good. This will be useful. But I think you've just got to have that open mind, but at the same time, that skepticism, and to say, okay, does it actually do what it says as well? Because I
think that's really good insight. And what I don't think about, what you brought up, is the added complexity of adding a system into your process. You may think your process is not complex at all, but it is, right? You have CRM, you have scheduling, meeting links, you have, different parties in your sales organization, and you add one more piece to the puzzle, you're going to have that piece connect, and the workflow in everybody's mind. They have to understand how that AI tool or that tool fits into the puzzle. And that just creates more complexity, more routines, and another reason why the system as a whole could fail. So
definitely. I mean, I think even if you look at, the typical tech stack, and the typical, let's say you're selling software, most of the time when you go on a company's website and you're looking for more information, there'll be a button which says book a demo. So most people will book a demo, and actually what happens is they book a demo, they schedule a call with a salesperson as a result. The salesperson then walks through all of these different steps, these qualification questions. At the end of the 30 minutes, the prospect's sitting there going, I haven't actually seen anything. I've just answered all these questions. And then if they qualify, they then get to have the demo. At this point, the demo then takes place. If it's a big complex sale, they'll be invited into a sales room where they have to go to the sales room in order to collect all of this literature and, track every process. And whilst I understand on paper each step makes sense for the company, it doesn't make sense for the prospect half the time. And I think this is the challenge, is we're looking at it from one point of view as, as a seller. This would be great. Let's have someone go onto our virtual sales room. Let's have someone, qualify, so we know that we're only meeting with people who actually can buy stuff now, and let's weed it out every step of the way. But to the prospect, they're thinking, why am I going for all of this? And this process seems very stretched and overwinded.
Yeah, that's really big too. I'd say it's important to build trust within the sales cycle, which is why like a discovery call could be important just to get that human face to face. But replacing that with like an AI for like a face to face conversation, I think is moving backwards. I'm seeing like AI discovery tools and stuff like that. I'm like, you're moving the wrong direction, right? The whole point of the discovery call is to discover the pain points, but also to build the trust, because people buy from people who they trust. So I think that's, we got to be wary of how much you can really automate when it comes to emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah. Why are we outsourcing that to AI? I'm all up for AI. I love AI. I use AI every day. I bounce ideas off AI. I refine what I'm doing. I use AI to help me question processes and things like that, and I use it for feedback. But in my mind, I wouldn't at this moment use it to replace anything I do, because, for instance, on discovery, if I'm a salesperson, I want to be doing the discovery. I want to be asking those questions. Like you say, it's a trust exercise as well. It's where you can establish trust. It's where you can start that relationship, as cheesy as it sounds, but it's where you build that rapport. And it's the discovery is a key crucial part of the sales cycle. Without discovery, you're just an order taker. So why would you want to outsource that to someone else or something else?
Something else, right? And it can't do it better. Like AI is not going to do better than a human, because that emotional.
AI will be good. It's good to get questions from AI, but do it yourself, and then you can add your own thing to it.
Exactly. And the last thing I'll add on this, you touched on this a little bit, is AI LinkedIn generation, AI email. It asks too few questions to get to know what your business does at its core and the pain point that you actually solve, and it scales too fast. So you can very quickly scale bad process, bad messaging, and just overall like bad value proposition when you log on to these AI tools, because they try and make it quick for you, because answering a ton of questions about what your business does, why people want to buy your tool, can be time consuming. It's longer onboarding, but those are really important. And if you haven't done the legwork to make your website look a certain way, or just have the perfect one-liner, some of these AI tools are going to start pitching your tool and your company the wrong way. It's just straight up,
The problem with AI is it amplifies your ideas, and that on first basis doesn't necessarily sound like a bad thing, because you go, okay, well, I want my ideas to be amplified. I want our views to be amplified. But if it hasn't understood what your ideas are, it's going to amplify it in the way it interprets. And, I've seen this before. I've fallen for this, where I will use AI and it will tell me what I want to hear.
Right.
And I will type something in based on how I've assessed something. And you'll then go down the rabbit hole and it'll say, yes, this means this. It's using logic and reason to help you out. But actually, sometimes you need to step back and go, is that actually the message? And I think this is the challenge with lead generation, with outbound. We might think that we've got a good process. AI will only amplify that. So if it doesn't work and you bring AI in to make more dials or more conversations or more outreach, it's just going to make that larger. It's just going to create that problem even bigger for you. You're not going to get a refined approach. It's just going to, instead of speaking to 100 people, it's going to go for that same message of 1,000 or 10,000. Right. So you're just going to have more of a mess to clean up after.
Exactly. Hit the nail on the head. I feel like I talk about this subject specifically for hours, but we only got an hour here. So I want to get your take on the rise of AI cold callers. Are you afraid of the rise of AI cold callers?
Am I afraid of AI cold callers? I've never witnessed an AI cold call live. I've listened to a few AI cold calls. I think someone shared something on LinkedIn the other week of an AI call. I've never had one, and I've never seen one in action. From what I've heard, I'm not worried. So do I think AI will get to the point where it can cold call? Yes. Short answer, yes. I believe at some point in the next couple of years, AI should get to a point where it's able to articulate a conversation. It's able to pick up on nuances, which me and you can pick up on. It's able to, use emotion and intelligence, and it's able to suggest what to say next and actually, deliver that maybe in the right tone. I think with the right training and the right learning, it's a smart model. It can do that, I think, with a bit of refinement. Will it be allowed? I don't know. At the moment, my understanding is it's not. It's certainly in some countries. I'm pretty sure in the UK it's not currently allowed, or you have to declare it before doing so. And do I think people will be receptive on it? I don't think so. Not initially. The example I draw to on this is, I don't know whether it's I imagine it must be the same in the US. In the UK, we've got Tesco as a superstore. I don't know if you've got Tesco or
we don't got Tesco.
So they're basically like Walmart, but they've got everything.
Okay.
And you have the self-checkout tills. Now, a few years ago, there was this big initiative where they said, right, let's bring in all of these self-checkout tills. We're going to reduce the number of staff because we don't need the staff anymore. We only need one member of staff to manage these 20 checkout tills. And, on first basis, it made perfect sense. Everyone was like, yeah, this is great. It's faster. It's cheaper for the company. You can get more done. Every time you go to a self-checkout till, there's always an issue. You'll scan something, you'll put it down, and something will happen. Right. And it will mean there's some human intervention which is needed, to the point where some of these supermarkets have now started going back and saying, actually, we're going to bring more humans back in. We're still going to keep them because there's a purpose for them. If you're going in for one or two things, it's perfect. But if you're going in with a big shop, you're not going to put your stuff on that till because something's always going to pop up. You're always going to need authorization to buy alcohol or something like that. And I think that's where AI will fall as well. I think there will be a point in time where AI will be able to do the cold calls, and for more transactional business, it might become relevant. But actually, for more complex sales cycles, I believe human touch will always be needed. Maybe in different parts. I'm talking maybe 20 years into the future now, there might be this place where AI introduces the call and gets you to the point where you have that conversation. But I genuinely believe that as long as cold calling stays as a human channel, there shouldn't be too much intervention with AI.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's an interesting idea, to have AI take part of the cold call and then pass it off to somebody else in the same cold call.
I'm thinking about, in the 80s, for instance, when you used to have, I'm referring to, the Wolf of Wall Street, the film Wolf of Wall Street. At the start, his first job was to be the connector. I think that's what they called him, where he'd have to make the dials. And if someone answered, then he'd transfer them to that guy, and then he'd then make the deal. That's where I can maybe see it happening.
Yeah.
Maybe in a not too distant future.
I think that's more plausible than having it take the whole call. And then again, you have the issue of legality of AI cold callers. So
if you're a CEO, are you really going to want to speak to AI?
I'm like, I'm sorry, I want to talk
inbound,
to this.
Inbound, maybe, again,
inbound, right. Because I'm curious. Let me talk to something. Most of the time I get frustrated because it's not answering my questions right. But I'm more inclined to be okay with an inbound AI caller than an outbound, for sure. A lot more inclined. So
definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know you've been doing cold calls for a long time. Before you answer this question, I'd love for you to talk through your journey, when you started cold calling and the different ebbs and flows of that. And then just answer the question, if someone wants to get into cold calling 2026, what are a couple of things they should watch out for?
Okay. Well, I'll give you the story, and I'll try and give a very high level overview because I can sometimes be a bit guilty for going really deep into it and talking too much. So I'll give everyone a real high overview of where I started and where I am now and what I've learned. And so basically I started in 2011. I came out of university, had a degree, which wasn't really worth its weight on paper. Needed to find a job, and quickly realized that actually I wasn't going to get any job which I wanted. I fell into a sales role. So we're talking, it was proper boiler room environment. I remember first day I was walking in and it was 200 people, 200 to 300 people in this room. And it was just making calls. We were basically selling mobile phones to small contractors. So like electricians, plumbers, builders, one-man bands basically, and we were selling phone contracts. I did that for a week, and I started to get used to it within a week. And then the company went into liquidation, so they closed down, which I was gutted because I just got used to it.
Yeah.
I'd just passed probation within a week, and I was like, yeah, this is all right. And then I landed another sales job, stayed there for a few years, learned a bit more about cold calling and how to actually structure the call. And then I fell into a role which I was in for 6 or 7 years, and that was being a bit more strategic. We were targeting hotels, and we were selling software to hotels. Within that time, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what not to do. I had a really good manager who oversaw me and helped me with that development. And it was in that time when I realized, okay, if this is my role now, I need to learn to get better. So I started consuming books. I started following people on LinkedIn. I started going to courses. I started doing everything I could to become a bit better than what I was, because I was still relying on heavy volume. I was still having to make, 100, $200 a day in order to move the needle and have decent conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I fell into, I came across Sandler as a sales methodology. So I fell into that and I was like, this is great, because the concept of a pattern interrupting the pattern, getting permission to speak, and then delivering 1 or 2 problems. So that was really the start of when I, really looked at it from a methodical point of view. Mm-hmm. And what I liked about it was very, you close every process off and you look at it almost as a scientist and you try different things out. And that worked with my method quite well, because that's how I see things as a person. I did that for a few years. I was desperate to become a salesperson selling software. I ended up getting that chance, and then I ended up going back into SDR role, and then I ended up becoming a fractional SDR on behalf of other companies. And I would honestly say, hand on heart, I've learned more in the last 4 years than I have combined for the other 10 years.
Wow!
Because I've learned firsthand how to adapt in different industries. I've learned how to put the script together. I've learned how to identify what's working and what's not. It's that balance of saying, okay, this isn't quite working. Where do I need to change it? Or do I just keep going until it does work because I have faith? And it's finding that balance. So yeah, it's all those little things which you kind of work on. And yeah, over the last couple of years, I've definitely feel like I've learned a lot more than I have in the previous 10 combined.
Yeah.
If someone was starting today, what do I always say to them? I think the challenge is, and this is a challenge now, this isn't a criticism. When I started really taking sales seriously, I looked at a few people on LinkedIn and the content to me made perfect sense. And from that, I learned the methodologies, read the books, went to the courses, I invested in myself. It was easier to work out who was actually real back then versus who was maybe pretending. And I think that's partially because it was harder to pretend back then. You didn't have all of that information. You couldn't say it without being able to back it. Whereas I feel today in 26, it's a lot easier for someone to pretend they know what they're talking about and actually have no substance and no evidence to back. So I would always say err on the side of caution, especially on LinkedIn. There's some really good advice out there, but I think you need to take everything with a pinch of salt. What worked for one person doesn't necessarily mean it works for someone else. And it might work for one industry, but it doesn't necessarily mean it can be carried over. So that to me is anybody who's starting today, I'd say just please bear that in mind, because if you judge yourself on other people's openers and other people's approaches and it doesn't work for you, you might then put yourself down and say, oh, I'm obviously just not good at it. Whereas it might just mean you need to find a different approach, one that fits you.
Yeah, fits you and your industry, right?
That's it.
You're going to resonate.
I was lucky. I was able to find something, and I've managed to spend the last couple of years really honing in on it. And, I'm to the point where I'll try new things out. I see an opener sometimes and go, I'll give it a go. But I always revert back to my old opener because it's worked for me for the last 10 years.
Yeah. You're natural. You know how to say it, and people are still responding to it. Then there's no reason to kick it out the door.
Sometimes I'll try something, or someone will say, you should try this. And I'll say, okay, I'll try it on the next call.
Right. And see what happens. It's funny. When I try something new for the first time, it usually goes well. And then the second, third, fourth time, it usually goes downhill. And I feel like when you try something for the first time, at least for me, there's an excitement and sort of an energy to it. But it's not repeatable because you can't keep that energy that you had when you were trying it for the first time. So something that works for the first time is not the same as something that's repeatable and scriptable for you or organization.
And I think it's about understanding what's going on.
That's true too.
So,
Why are
again,
you're saying?
people, when they're talking about openers, for instance, they'll often copy an opener which they see, but they're not understanding the psychology and what's happening behind it.
Right.
And that's quite hard to replicate. You know, first of all, if you don't understand why you're saying something, then it's quite hard to adapt it. And if you understand why you're saying something, you then have confidence in it because there's logic and there's science and there's reason behind it. You know, the reason I'm saying this is because most likely this is going to happen.
Right.
And you know what behaviors are typically drawn from saying a particular thing. Whereas if you're just saying something and have no idea what it actually does, you're just hoping it has a result. Even if it does work, you're questioning and going, why did that work? And that's almost more concerning because then you don't know why that could work. And you know, being in sales, you have to sometimes deviate slightly and you have to adapt. And openers are one of those things where you can't adapt it if you don't understand it.
Yeah.
My opener has been pretty much the same over the years. Sometimes I'll make a variation of it depending on the industry or what's been said back to me. And I'm able to do that because I understand my opener and I understand why I say, you know, I could break down every particular word and say, I say this because of this. I say that because of that. I might not have the scientific explanation behind it, but I know the logic behind it and I've got the evidence to prove it.
It is interesting how changing one word in an opener can change the results of how people respond to you. I've been training Xavier students around cold calling, and the opener that's worked 90% of the time for me is, hey, Luke, this is Matthew. Got 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling. Yep. And I changed that opener from, do you have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling, to got 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling. And the results shifted, you know, dramatically. And teaching that to students, and I'm saying like, hey, I know this is simple. This is like a half of a second sentence, but though changing those 3 words to that 1 word is going to actually change your results dramatically.
And you can adapt it. You know, if you speak to someone who you feel you need to say the full delivery to, you will. You'll feel it on the phone. And I think that's what's quite hard to articulate to people is sometimes when you do something long enough, you get a feeling, okay, I need to say this particular phrase with this person because this is the impression they're giving me. So I'll maybe slow down slightly. I'll try and mirror their tone. I will try and use, you know, maybe slightly larger words. Whereas most of the time I'll try and keep it really simple. I'll try and, you know, keep it casual and conversational. But if I'm speaking to someone who I feel is, you know, demanding authority on the phone and they've got this real almost boss-like aura about them, then I'll try and level up myself, and not too much. I don't want to become fake, but I just want to present the best version of myself in that moment
that they're going to respond to. And that's your tactics to mirror. Cool. Well, I know we've talked a lot about how you've been approaching LinkedIn and you've been doing some of your own tests and studies of what works in cold calling. I wanted to talk about that in a little bit because demystifying outbound outreach is a passion of mine and what this whole initiative is about. So what have you done to try and demystify what works in cold calling?
So I've looked back at a few things. I've looked back at when campaigns have been successful, when they've not. You know, I think that's more important to look at sometimes what actually went wrong. And ultimately, I try and find as many patterns as I can. You know, I'm trying to look at every area and saying, okay, what's the learning? What can be learned from this? What am I actually observing? What am I looking at? So, for instance, a recent post I did was breaking down 30 meetings I'd booked. So these were 30 meetings that had been booked, all from cold, and they all sat as well. I felt that I needed to make sure these were 30 meetings which were met and sat, because I think that's, you know, the part which people don't speak about as well. It's easy just to book a meeting, but actually if it sits, that's the important part. So I broke down all of these 30 meetings. I looked at the dispositions. Now, again, disposition, for anyone who's not quite familiar with what I mean, I'm talking about, you know, when you end the call, what I'll label it as. And I'm very big on labeling. I'm very big on making sure that every conversation has the right label next to it. So without deviating too much, my belief is that when you have a conversation with someone, ultimately it's going to fall into one of several buckets. It's going to fall into, you know, assuming I've spoken to the person, I've talked about the 1 or 2 issues which they might be facing and they've agreed or disagreed. They're either going to agree and say, you know what, Luke, this is absolutely relevant to us, and this is perfect timing. We are looking at this. I would say, right, this is a hot lead if they end up booking a meeting. So I would class it as relevant and right time. If they say, yeah, this is relevant, but we're a few months out from talking about this, we've got a new marketing manager starting in October. That's going to be one of our initiatives. This is when we need to bring in the conversation. I would class that as relevant, but wrong time. Or if I call someone, tell them what it's about, tell them the 2 or 3 problems I solve, and they go, yeah, that's not really an issue for us. And I have a real explanation as to why it's not, and we have a back and forth discussion, I'd class that as just not relevant. And those obviously you get your learnings from, because you can work out, okay, why wasn't it relevant? Why did we think it would be? You can go back. But ultimately, I'm looking at these dispositions, and they're the start of the call. So when I'm booking meetings, I want to start looking more at dispositions and saying, where did that meeting come from originally? Because again, most of my meetings don't come from the first call. And this is one of the things I was trying to demystify when I first originally did this. I wanted to demystify the fact that not all cold calls need to result in a meeting on the first attempt. Sometimes it'll take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you name it, any attempt. And there'll be different dispositions before they get to that point. So I broke down these 30 meetings, and I found that 8 of the 30, for instance, the first time I'd spoken to that prospect, they'd said, really busy, can you give me a call back? 8 out of 30.
Wow.
So I called them back at the time and date suggested, or even if there wasn't a date suggested, I just called them back another time. We end up having a conversation. It might be one where they say, "I'll give me a call back a few months later," then give them a call back a few months later. And eventually that turned into a meeting. Now, I wanted to highlight that because a lot of people assume that if a prospect says, "Oh no, I'm busy, I don't have time to speak," they write it off. Same as if a prospect says, this is maybe relevant, but it's not quite the right time. We write it off too quickly as SDRs.
Right.
And partly is because that's not what we're being paid to do. We're being paid to book the meetings, which I think fundamentally needs to change. The CRM doesn't measure it. I ask sales leaders every day when I speak to them, I say, where do you see the people who are looking in 6 months? And they look at me with this confused face as if to say, well, what do you mean? And I say, well, how do you measure the people who are looking in 6 months? What do your salespeople put them as when they've spoken to them? There's no warm lead button. There's no looking in 6 months button. It's either not interested, call back, meeting booked.
Right.
And as we know, when you book the meeting, it doesn't start there. It started months before. Depending on what you're selling, it probably started a year before if it's enterprise. And people aren't even tracking this. So this is a big gap, I think, in sales. So this is part of what I'm trying to demystify, but it's a big process. So I'm trying to chip away at it slowly and surely. And I'm trying to do it in a way that resonates with people. And they go, okay, that makes a bit of sense. So I'm starting with the callbacks. So that's what I'm trying to do. And yeah, it's hard work, but it's.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I love the philosophy, and you're absolutely right. As someone who builds software, built a dialer, there's not the infrastructure digitally set up to properly track when somebody's going to be ready to be called back again. It's just interested, call back, disinterested, right? And putting that philosophy that you just mentioned into the software, just a simple button like, hey, they need to be called back in 3 months, or some sort of progress bar with how likely someone is to be at the right time.
The challenge is the salesperson, the SDR has the conversation with the prospect. They're already having these conversations most likely. It could be refined and retuned and made more optimized, but ultimately they're speaking to your prospect, and the prospect is saying, yeah, this might be something in 6 months. They're logging it as an unsuccessful call. They will maybe put in the notes, hopefully, if they're doing their job, they're putting in the notes, why it's 6 months. And hopefully they're putting a call back for 6 months' time. But the VP of sales does not see that. They see it as an unsuccessful call. And the dashboards completely reflect that. They show, oh, you made 20 calls and you booked 1 meeting. And they celebrate the 1 meeting, but they don't look at the 19 calls. They might ask the question, why didn't those 19 convert?
Right. Yeah.
And the problem is, if that SDR gets promoted or is booted out, which, let's be honest, that happens all the time, because an SDR is brought in on the promise that they're going to become an AE. And if they aren't good, they're going to be kicked out anyway. So most of our SDRs don't last more than 12, 18 months. So they're not following through long enough. They're not seeing it through long enough to the point where they're calling them back in 6 months. Because by that time, they're the AE. And then the new SDRs come into the block and they've got a new script and a new process and a new area. And they've completely disregarded those follow-up calls. And there's no accountability because the VP of sales doesn't even know about it. It relies on the SDR being on their game. So you find the good SDRs are the only ones who really are able to track it. And most of the time they're using different methods to do it anyway. And people are going, how are they pulling these conversations out? We used to have it. And again, all of this comes from previous insight. And I didn't realize I was doing it. Back in one of my first roles, I had an Excel spreadsheet. And when I spoke to someone who was potentially interested 3 or 4 months off, I'd just write the name on the spreadsheet. And I would put a note, call them back in, I don't know, September. I'd obviously update the CRM as well, but I found it hard to navigate the CRM and see callbacks for the future. It would pop up calls for today and calls for this week, but it wouldn't show you too much in advance. And at the end of each month, I'd sit there and go, okay, is there anyone I could call from next month now to try and book the meeting? Because I was incentivized on booking meetings. And I would look for that list and say, okay, they wanted to call back in May. It's now April. I could probably call them back now and book the meeting. And I used to get so much success from that. And it's only years later looking back. The reason is because I kept track of it. But I didn't even realize why I was doing it.
That's incredible. Just instinctively, you're like, hey, these people said they want me to call them back. I'm just going to call them back a little bit early.
Yeah. And I was doing it for the sake of getting a meeting, but it worked.
Right. And it's just, there's opportunity for the software creators out there to create their functionality that fits this philosophy. So thanks for bringing that up. Last question I got for you is, what's your plans for the future as you continue to bring science and clarity into cold calling?
So I think my plans for the future, I want to continue practicing cold calling. I want to continue making cold calls as much as possible. So I'm quite lucky in that, you know, that is my job. That is what people pay me to do. I make cold calls every weekday, Monday to Friday. And I want to continue doing so. I want to continue making cold calls for other companies. And I want to try and improve my process as I go. You know, I'm a big believer that nobody is perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. I listen back to my calls all the time and say, oh, I should have said this. I should have done this. You know, had I gone for this, maybe this would have happened. And it's about becoming incrementally better each time. So number one, I want to keep doing that. Secondly, I really am interested in helping people become better at cold calling and have that knowledge of sales. You know, like the mission you're talking about, demystifying sales and outbound. I think it is one of these subjects which is misrepresented in a lot of different areas. I understand why, and I'm not here to pull everyone down and say no, you're doing it wrong, but I want to shine a light on actually what I find works well and have the evidence behind it to say this is why I believe so. So those are the two things I'm working on, and also I'm trying to build my own methodology later on, you know, which speaks around this whole showing up before the prospect is looking to buy, you know, based on like showing up when they're problem aware, but they're not quite solution or product aware yet. And again, this all ties into what I was speaking about before in terms of like showing up at the right time. And I think that the first step is having visibility of those people. And the second step is actually then having the process to be able to show up 2 months before they're starting to look. Because I always say to sales leaders, you know, imagine if you could show up 3 months before your competitors. You know, if you started conversations with them before they even go to market and go and speak to everyone else, what would that be worth to you? And they're like, well, yeah, that'd be amazing. Right. Okay. Well, how do we build that? Let's reverse engineer it. How do we get to that point? Before you get to that point, you need to be able to have visibility of those. So that's the first challenge, because no one has visibility of that. So it's building that way through processes and maybe through technology of how do you get to that point where you've got a visible pipeline. Because imagine I get excited about it. Imagine as a VP of sales or sales leader or even a CEO, imagine being able to look at your forecast and say, in the next 6 months, we know that 20 of our top accounts are likely looking at this. So we can now spend more money on marketing. We can spend more money. Let's do a roundtable event. Let's send some direct mail out to them. Let's spend some actual money on this and make sure that when they do come to that solution, we are the first ones they think of. Let's connect with them on LinkedIn. Let's spend all of our time multi-threading these accounts. Let's make sure that our name is the name which is uttered on everyone's lips on that account, so that we're not missed out. Because quite often we show up too late.
Yeah.
As salespeople, we show up when they're already looking, and by that point, they've already made a decision.
Right.
And you're competing for price, and no one wants to compete on price and discount. That's, that's depressing when you have to discount 50% in order to even get a foot in the door.
Right. Incredible. Have visibility into prospects who will be looking for your product in the future. And in order to have that, you got to be on the phones. You got to be on the phones and them tell you when they're starting to look, and track that. That's good stuff, Luke. I really appreciate you hopping on. This is a great conversation. I'm excited to blast it out. And just excited for the future of our relationship partnership here. Luke, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.